Hi there, Scott Meyer here with Artist Network, and I want to welcome you to this live event with Johannes Vloothuis, everything you need to know about painting water. Now, Johannes is our very popular painting instructor, leading paint-along events to students from around the world who gather to watch him paint in oils, pastels, and watercolor, artists of all levels. He has a unique teaching style, breaking down even the most complex topics and ideas into very simple and actionable tasks that you can perform in your own work. So every artist walks away feeling more empowered and confident in their own work. So we're here to learn about painting water. Stay tuned on artistnetwork.com. Make sure you are subscribed in your newsletters so that you can receive updates on new events because they happen regularly. Go to artistnetwork.com/paintalong to stay up to date with new paint along events. So without further ado, let's get started with everything you need to know about painting water.
Hi everybody, this is Johannes. Thank you for that wonderful presentation there, Scott. Appreciate it. So today we're going to learn everything that you want to know about painting water. Here's our little mascot. Everything is all systems go here. Sorry about yesterday, everybody, but everything's going to be fine today. Everything's working well. Okay. So let's get started, and right now we have here principles of reflections, which is probably the most important thing that you want to know about. So here's that you want to you can take screenshots of these charts, but I will give you this PDF for those who register for this Saturday course. You'll get a copy of this PDF, so either you want to take a screenshot or do it this way. Okay, so I'm going to read to you where it says here, in lakes and rivers we see the following conditions. Still water, common in ponds and small lakes when no wind is present. Water moving lazily, that's the most suitable in paintings when water reflections are preferred. You will see examples of this. Water ripples with more motion, that's like in between a silent lake and some overwhelming reflections. It's in the middle somewhere, but it's not a really good method for painting reflections. And the last one would be water so disturbed you can't see the reflections. This applies basically to large bodies of water such as lakes and seascapes on a windy day, and it will lead to a boring painting. Okay, so let's see some examples of this. These are photographs, not paintings right now, but I will show you some paintings. Here's an example of still water. This mirrored effect gives the sense of cloning. Changes are necessary. So this is pretty common, right? This is a very calm day. There's no wind. Obviously, you can't go sailing that day. And now this is cropped, so it's not that bad because it's also mirroring the sky, but you can still see it's mirroring the trees and the hill. If you go do plein air painting, this is not a good example of what you would like to paint because you can see this mirrored effect. It's cloned and it doesn't make for a good painting. So those are practically out. There is a way to solve that if you must insist on having a still pond. Let's say you're doing a pond that has water lilies and it's usually quite quiet and you want to make it somewhat believable. The option would be doing this. You drag some of those shimmers across it. If you compare this one, it only had a little bit of shimmer, not enough to offset the cloning. And then you have this one that does have the shimmers. This is photoshopped, of course. And so that it dampens that equality that we had earlier. Another good possibility would be the mixture of both. In this case, we have wind can blow randomly across the water and stir up ripples. These will cover the reflections. Some areas can be still where reflections are seen. Many artists will exploit this to create interesting water scenes. So you can see that over here, you can see these are shimmers, right? That means the wind is blowing across the lake and it's disturbing the water. Whereas this over here serves like a wall. It's blocking the wind, so you can see the reflections here. So the combination of both is very nice to have that. Okay. Let's go to the next slide here. Okay, this is how I applied this in this watercolor. It's not the same scene, of course, but you can see that I have a combination of the shimmers plus some of the reflections, so you get the best of both worlds. That way you avoid the mirrored effect, and yet you get this quality of the wet water. This is Yosemite National Park. So it's like a quick sketch of a watercolor. This slide here is showing you a photograph that would be the most suitable for these kind of reflections, where you got this lazy moving water, but it's not an exact clone. Lazy moving water is the preferred option. You still have reflections to make the area interesting, yet it becomes distorted enough to offset the mirrored clone of aspect. So you can see the trees are broken up, and that somehow works better. That was applied, for example, in this pastel. You can see the reflections are blurred. There's some movement over here in this area. That zigzagging motion is what you're looking for when you create these reflections. And so that you get the feeling of water, but you don't get the mirrored effect. This is a little bit more of an exaggeration that we artists do. And what's very pleasing about this is you got this nice motion here. Your eye dances along this line here. So the eye dances with swerved reflections. When depicting lazy moving water, many artists add vertical things such as flag posts, flag post here, dock posts, or boat masts, which is this one, to enhance the reflection. So you can create that zigzag effect. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of the anatomy of this. Okay, let's zoom in here so you can see how to do this. It's a little bit tricky. Yeah, dancing eye. Okay, so the trick is you start with the solid line where it starts, like that. This is reflecting this pole over here, right? So you start with a solid line. You swerve it a little bit, like squiggly. And then when you're about maybe a little bit past the halfway, you start to break it up and let some of the water go in between, and it breaks up more and more as it gets closer to you. The same effect you can see over here, where you got this sort of like zigzag effect, and then it breaks up with water in between. That's what makes it so pleasant. So that's the number one way of doing reflections. Same over here, and same over here. Okay. This is the one that I said earlier. This one here, water ripples with more motion, common in rivers and stream reflections are barely noticeable. Not such a good idea to try to paint this, because yes, you get some reflections, but it looks very weak. So I don't recommend painting something like that. So the best thing is to go back to what I said earlier. This is your best option here. This one, water moving lazily. And you'll see that in most professional paintings, by the way. Okay, now this is the worst. This is a culprit, a disease, a virus. In a plein air scenario or reference photo, I'll tell you, sometimes it can be that windy where it completely obliterates all your reflections and just creates one solid look. It even looks like ice. There's no reflections in a painting that would look totally unfinished and boring due to many square inches of repetitive visual information. This kind of water is not recommended. So this is where, if you are plein air painting, let's suppose you're setting up your easel behind those bull reeds and you decide to do this painting. Of course, it's got several problems, but okay, so If you're plein air painting, you just can't, I mean, you can copy it, but you might have to use artist license where you refer to your visual memory that you've done scenes like this before where it's not that windy and create your own reflections. That's where you resort to what I'm telling you, that you do the swerved kind of reflections. Now there's another way out. It's all about square inches, right? So let's take this example here. This photo was taken on a windy day. Again, you get that solid water. Okay, just a few questions here. Are you still with me here, Jude?
Yes, I don't see any questions, Joe.
Oh, okay, Carol sent me a message saying that there were comments, so I thought you were disconnected. Okay.
No, I'm here. I'm reading them. You're good.
Thank you. Okay. I have a very neat technique. When I analyze a photograph or a painting, I use what is called the chessboard analogy, where I square it out by 8 squares. If it's 8 by 8, if it's a square format, or a rectangle, would be 8 by, in this case, 5, right? So one path to success in your paintings is when you look at each square, something should be happening in each of these squares. So there should be 2 things present. Number 1, variation of color. Number 2, gradation of value. Both together if possible. Now when we look at this through the grid here, the mosquito screen, like a mosquito would be watching a tennis game, right? With the windscreens. You can see that each square here is repeated information. That is a ticket to a dead areas in your painting. And there's 2 ways you can fix this. Either you crop it out, or you add special effects, such as rocks under the water, logs under the water, water lilies, or more grasses, whatever you want to do. Just, you got to perk up that area so that when you're looking at each square where I put the check mark, something has to be happening in each and every one of them. And by the way, we have the same problem up here in the sky. You see, we got that square and that square are the same. So you need to do something about that. That sky is also boring. Like this photograph here is plagued with problems. This is Mount Rundle, by the way, in Banff National Park. So the way out of that is, if you don't want to add all those special effects, just crop it, as you can see here. There you go. Just crop the photograph. And so if we do that mosquito screen thing again, we'll have these squares over here, right? But now each square is grabbing a portion of the grass. So there's something happening in each square. Therefore, it's going to work. So that's how you solve that problem if you want to have a solid lake. Now, sometimes solid lakes are also good because they become rest areas, which are also important. Because you might have a lot of visual information, lots of trees, lots of grass, mountains, clouds, and there's no break. There's no coffee break there for the viewer, and that can become busy. An example of a busy painting would be one that I did that I had to let it go, but I'll just show you quickly. That doesn't have a rest area. This one here, I did that plein air. That doesn't have a rest area. There's no solid area where it's peaceful. And so it also creates a little bit of a conflict there because there's no coffee break for the viewer. So don't look at this as a culprit, because sometimes these solid ice or solid snow can actually be good rest areas in a painting when everything else is busy. So you got to make that judgment call. Okay, so here are some professional techniques to actually perk up your water reflections or your lakes or rivers and everything. Lakes don't need a lot of reflections. This is Mount Edith also in Banff. No, this is Jasper National Park. Those, because I see quite a few people from Canada here, so I'm showing you the landmarks. Lakes don't need a lot of reflections. To fill void spots, you can strategically place them to suit your composition. I tend to shy away from the pronounced reflections at the back part of a lake. It helps convey further distance by leaving them out. Okay, so let's explain that. You play this little game where, yes, I want reflections here, but I don't want reflections there. So over here, for instance, we have reflections, and you can say, well, the trees are blocking the wind so that you would see still water there. There's a hint of reflection over here, just to avoid that boredom of the squares in that area. But back here, there are none. Now, I can justify that and say, well, there's a lot of wind there and there's a shimmer, but I don't like to add, even if this was a still lake, I still don't like to add reflections at the very back part of it because it doesn't convey the sense of recession enough. So my recommendation is at the very end of a large body of water, don't add any reflections to it. Okay, this is very important now. This part about the anatomy of a reflection. You want to have the piano keyboard analogy that I've used with my students. I come up with these funny analogies. A lot of you understand what I'm talking about when I even sing the song during my class and I say, ebony and ivory, right? Side by side on my piano keyboard. So they remember this silly analogy. But I'm going to help you remember it now for the new people. The way it works is when you do the reflections, you want to have value variations in that area. So you go dark, a little bit lighter, lighter, dark, light, light, dark, light, dark, light, which would represent the black and white keys on the piano keyboard. That really makes a convincing way of doing your reflections. Okay. Now, I want to do this for you too. Okay, the trick is when you do these reflections, start darker where it starts at the very place where the reflection starts and gradually get lighter as you go down. This works very well for reflections on wet streets. Let's say you're going to do a New York City wet street composition where you got these car lights on, right? So you start very powerful reflections right where the car lights are, but as you go down the street, well, actually going up the street towards you, these get lighter, 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 and less intense, less saturated. So you can see that it started out slightly darker here. Slightly darker here and gets lighter. So this, and I also found a way not to put a reflection at the very back. I just increased the shimmer, which also creates a gradient plane, right? Because that's something that we'll talk about. If some of you are new, you might not know exactly what I'm referring to, but it's a very important concept. Hopefully you can join some of my workshops. There's one starting day after tomorrow where you're going to be hearing this kind of terminology. It's very important. But for those who are my students already, the idea here is to create a gradient plane where I go from one value and gradually, slowly go to lighter, 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 lighter. That also conveys a very good sense of recession. And then you just justify that with it's windy over back there or the sun's hitting the water and there are no reflections. But you can see I'm holding true to the fact that I put reflections in the foreground, some in the middle ground, but I didn't put them all the way to the background. Okay, see, another special effect that really can make a painting be jaw-dropping. I was very happy with this pastel that I did again in a live workshop with my students here. I'm sure a lot of you remember that. You put moonlight in the water. And there you go. It creates a very beautiful effect. Or just reflect direct sunlight. These paintings are the ones that fly off the walls. So consider even changing the time of the day, that you can have, let's say, just an average photograph. Let's say like this one, a blah photograph. But if you change the time of the day and obscure it, either at a twilight where you can put the moon, or almost at, at nighttime, and you put sunlight there, you put the moon there, this whole painting can revolutionize and end up looking much better. So these are very good examples right here. My original reference photo did not have this moody pink sky in this, this twilight kind of time of the day. It didn't have the moon in it. I added all that off just a lame photograph that just had trees and water, but it's something to really consider. Or you can take a picture of a photograph of a sunset and add that also to a photograph that really doesn't have anything going for it. Okay.
Many of your students saying, love this one, love this one. Isn't it interesting how those moody paintings just shine to everyone?
Yeah, we know that. We know that these kind of paintings are the ones that work. And I use a lot of these examples in class. Obviously I fluctuate between 500, 600 students. I've taught over 20,000 students. I've been working for Artist Network for going into 12 years now. And so I've had many, many students, and I've learned so much because I know exactly which paintings are impactful. And these are the kind that are impactful. And so that's why I'm suggesting that you do this. You don't have to respect the time of the day in the photograph. But moody paintings are the ones that most students are looking forward to. I get many comments where they say, well, I looked at the 3 photographs that you submitted on Artist Network, and I wasn't really excited about it, but since I've seen you do paintings before, I registered anyway. And then they say, I'm so glad that I did, because I completely revolutionized those paintings. Okay, this is also in Canada. This scene here in Yoho National Park. Now, here's a secret. This is like something that we laugh about, and especially in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that with the professionals get together and they talk with each other and they hold their hands in front of their mouth so people don't hear. They say, just put logs and stones in your paintings and show the lake bed or the river bed, and it will sell. And so if you go into those galleries like Legacy Gallery or Trailside Gallery in Scottsdale or in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you'll see easily 75% of the paintings that are showing these things under the water, and it really creates it makes the viewer feel that they can put their hand right in the water and touch a rock or a log. So that's much better than just a boring lake. See, if I pull this down like that, it's not the same, right? We don't have that effect. So almost every professional artist there will take advantage of that. That's why I'm showing these special effects, so you can just not paint water, but add things onto the water. Here's another example of a painting I did during my workshops with my students. I play around. That one's a little bit more impressionist, more colorful. I experiment to see what their reactions are. And again, the rocks underwater is what makes this painting, besides all those purples and reds and oranges on the rocks, right? But it just goes to show that you can consider that. And nothing says that you have to stay with one reference photo. You can grab 2 or 3 reference photos. If you just get a data bank where you have the waterfall with the rocks, and you find another photograph that's similar to that, you can get on Flickr or Pixabay or Useblast. They're all over the place now. We have so much access to reference photos. And you can get the idea of the rocks underwater. So again, you get this feeling that you can put your hand right into the water, right? Or take off your socks and just walk on those rocks. When you can emotionally engulf a viewer, your painting's going to be successful. The compliment that should not be, oh, your painting looks real. It should say, a good compliment would be, oh, I can take off my socks and my shoes and put my feet in that water. That's when you're saying, okay, I succeeded. Because now the viewer is emotionally getting involved with his or her senses. Another way to neutralize a boring pond would be just put some water lilies in it with little flowers on it. So in this case, this painting was not about the background mountain. It was more about the foreground. And so I decorated the pond by adding these water lilies in a pattern, of course, where you jump like a frog from one pad to another as you advance into the distance. So they're set up strategically to create a visual path. Okay, this is not exactly about water, but I think it was very pertinent because when you have rocks that are wet, upgrade them by adding violet to the rocks. And I learned this after years. I didn't used to do it, and I started to find out that adding purples and oranges to my rocks really made a difference. It takes out that monochromatic gray, boring hue out of it. And now look what we got. We got those beautiful colors, especially in this area right over here. This is another example of a painting that doesn't have a rest area, by the way. It's a little bit busy, but okay, you got to let some things go. Okay, ice is a great addition to winter scenes. In this case, I just completed my course and did this. I just did, 2 Saturdays ago? And so I'm organizing it in a like a path where you have an S movement here. Now, over here, I let the snowbank touch visually, not realistically, the other snowbank behind it. So it doesn't seem so obvious that you're creating a highway pattern. But it's a really neat effect that you add ochres and burnt sienna to your ice. Me living in Canada, I see that all the time in the winter when it freezes over. So it wasn't hard for me to figure out what colors to put in there. But that's a very pleasing eye movement here, because then you latch on to this snow mound over here, and then you go over here, you don't find much more to go, so you go back this way, and you go all the way back to the farm over here, and bingo, we got ourselves a successful painting here. So in my view, when I create winter scenes, I don't go from snow to water. I go from snow to ice to water. Snow, ice, water. Like you can see in this painting here. I always like to add that little bit of water because it looks just so more believable. And I know that there can be cases where the water, this ice snow completely melts and you have that a highway pattern, but I always like to add the ice to my scenes, which, by the way, I'm going to give you a really neat formula for that. I'll get to the slide. It's here somewhere. Okay, this is one of the problems that we have as artists is how do I convince viewers that they're looking into yards and yards of information, even miles sometimes, way out into the distance? How do I convince the viewer of that when it's a two-dimensional surface? So one technique is you got the foreground over here. These trees would be the middle ground, and you got all this would be the background. When you add a shimmer right behind these trees here, it's sending a message to the viewer that there are, I don't know, maybe 100 yards, whatever you want to make it out to be, from the tree section to the background hill. This is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, by the way. This is, by the way, Gwen, if you're here, you'll recognize that. That's String Lake in the Teton National Park in Wyoming. Okay, I've come up with some of these crazy names, but my students get it. And one thing I've learned is over the years that when you create a visual path, right, which is normally what you do with water, you follow this over here, you hit the tree over here, you're bringing the viewer into the distance. But many times there's a problem where you hit a dead end. So when you add a little peekaboo in there, I don't know if that's the right name, but it works for us, right, guys? My students don't want me to change the terminology. It gives a sense of...
That's how we remember it. The
Yeah,
sillier it is, that's
Peekaboo.
when we remember it.
Peekaboo, right? I see you through the keyhole or whatever.
My favorite. I love that one.
Yeah.
We remember it and we use it then in our paintings.
Yeah. And so it gives a sense of continuity because you're adding the mystery, like, okay, you just didn't stop there. You keep going. And sometimes you can add several of them. This was a pastel also. Okay, how do we convince the viewer that water is moving when it's not. You don't have an actual fountain there with you, right? You have to fake it. So the only way that we can imitate motion in a painting is by blurring things. And that also includes people or vehicles. So if you have people walking on the street, you wouldn't paint their legs or their feet hard edge. You would blur them. So but if the water's splashing against the rocks, you would you convey that by adding mist to it. Incidentally, look at all the different colors in the water shadows. You'll never see that with the eye by itself. I've done many waterfalls, Lewis Falls, Moose Falls in Yellowstone National Park. I love waterfalls. They're one of my favorite subjects. And you look at the blue part of the water where the sun's not hitting it, you only see one dull gray-blue color. You don't see any of the surrounding colors in it. But we as artists have to exaggerate that. So that the greens, the turquoise green, there's a little bit of violet over there, there's some blue there, even some yellow in there at the bottom. All that is what makes it look so painterly. So this is an example where you just can't grab a reference photo and copy it or go plein air painting without any training. I've always said that plein air painting is great, but you need to have training to know where to override things that you're not seeing that work in paintings that have a life of their own versus the scene that has its outside view, its own life, which Mother Nature doesn't care about varying colors and adding reflected light. That doesn't care. Okay, winding streams or rivers can exit the painting on a side as long as you provide a reentry. In fact, I even endorse that. So here we have a stream that follows this kind of movement here, very lazy several S movements here. We put a little brake on it over here. There's a stoplight. Keep on going. We exit to the side, which is fine as long as you provide a way back in. In fact, it's advisable that you do that. Now here's the peekaboo. Here's another peekaboo. And we continue our trip all the way to the back here. The reason that I put these trees in here is that you don't want to make it so obvious that, again, you don't want that highway pattern. Yeah, so it would be a mistake to exit the painting on the side if you do not provide a way back in. And that way back in should be anywhere between, depending on the size of your canvas or paper, but I would say maybe an inch or so, maybe not more than 2 inches. So let's say I could have brought the viewer back in this way too. Give it more of a gap, but okay, it works one way or another. Okay. Oh, good information here, right? Well, there you. Some of you, if you're new, you can see the kind of information that's coming out here. Very applicable, right? I mean, right tomorrow when you do a painting, you got something to work with. This is what my workshops are all about. That's why I've been, having so many students. So we would like to have you as one of our students. If you're new or if you're not new, of course, we want the oldies but goodies to come back as well, of course. It's $14.99 for next Saturday, day after tomorrow, for an intensive 6-hour workshop. I'm not going to go through theory, even though I might repeat some of it, but I'm going to do just pure demos. So, for example, here you learned that I talked about something that would be a little bit confusing here for you, which would be the piano keyboard analogy. But that will all clear up to day after tomorrow when I demonstrate it, and you see me actually see me apply the paint or I create these effects, quick swatches. So it would be great to have you. And for that, they're going to be posting the links here in the chat. Okay, let's go back to where we were. All right. This here is probably the most important part of my presentation today. That's why I did a little stop there. You really want to learn this. It breaks it all down to the water reflections. Whatever is dark on dry land will be lighter in the water. Whatever is light on dry land will be darker in the water. So the reverse is true. In other words, if the darks get lighter and the lights get darker, therefore the values are closer together than on dry land. So you would not have an extreme dark and you would not have an extreme light. Now, you may see, this is where you just can't copy what you see. You can't just paint from nature because there will be contradictions. For example, let's say you have a still lake with a white sailboat and you want to reflect that white boat into the water. Now, maybe when you're looking at it, if the sun's striking it dead on, the reflection will be probably as white as the boat as you see it, but that's going to look really wrong in a painting. So when it comes to white boathouses or white buildings or whatever, snow, you have to downgrade that and gray it down and darken it a tad so it doesn't compete with the dry land. The problem here is you don't want that cloning effect with the dry land. And okay, so another principle is never show hard edges in water. So with acrylics, that can be a little bit of a problem because it dries too quickly. With oils, you can smudge it. With watercolor, you have to do a wet on wet, in my book anyway. Okay, so that you want to take a screenshot of that, whatever. You're going to, for those who are not going to sign up for next Saturday, you might want to take a screenshot of that and save it as a JPEG because that's very important information right there. Okay, so this photograph is probably accurate, which is rare, with the values that we just spoke about. As you can see, there's like a value 9 dark in here. It doesn't get darker than the value 7 there, but 10 being black. You can see that this is a lighter value here. This is somewhat darker. So these values are closer together. And by the way, you can clearly see the piano keyboard analogy. You got one key over here, another one over here, another one over here, here, here. So you can see all the values. If you squint your eyes in this area here, all those values tend to be somewhat closer together. Now this is a photograph that was not taken correctly, which is showing a contradiction to that. So you got to be careful. You just can't grab a reference photo and expect it to work just by copying it, because this creates a mirrored effect. Not so much because of the cloning. This is an error, that the same value of dark that you have here, you repeat that in the water, it'll look like a mirror. It won't look like water. So the reason for this is that water absorbs light, and the sky is more ethereal and allows more light to go through. So the fact that water absorbs light means it's going to neutralize the chroma of the highlights, and it's going to neutralize the dark values as well. So it's gonna average it out more.
Murmur is asking, how many values do you mostly use in a painting?
That's a great question. Mostly, oh, by the way, as you can see, this is very similar to the format of my live classes. I like live classes because this is precisely why, Murmur. You can ask a question right there and get an answer. It's not, I think I'm one of the few, or maybe the only one, that does live classes with paintings. And for sure, who improvises a painting every time. Okay, so there's a lot of reference to the value scale from 1 to 10, but all that is meaningless because nobody can produce 10 distinct values by hand. You can only do that by computer. I once offered students $100 if anybody could do it. Nobody was able to. So this is, you got to simplify all this. This is the way I work. I basically work with 4 values. The dark value, I reserve that. So I take, let's say, from 1 to 10. If 10 is black and 1 is white, I take 1, 2, 3 and make that into my mid-light. 4 and 5, my mid value. 6 and 7 would be my, no, wait, 1, 2, I have to do the math. But anyway, the first third of the values would be my mid-light, the second third would be my mid-dark, and then my third would be my mid, my mid and then my mid-dark. What I do is I go by comparison. So normally the best way is your sky would be normally your mid-light value. So you determine that most of the time it'll be the mid-light. Trees are usually your mid-dark. So by making that comparison, this falls in the middle of it. So I just think about, generally speaking, in 3 values. Does that make sense to you? Mid-light, mid, and mid-dark, and I'll reserve the dark if I need it for accents, for example, or to model a tree into a 3-dimensional image. But basically, I try to avoid anything that would lose its color standing 10 or 15 feet away. Everything should sing with color, which is always, you'll see that with the mid-light value, mid-value, and mid-dark value. So, okay, just to make it one more, to simplify, if 1 to 10, 10 is black and 1 is white, the beauty of color normally shows up between the 4, 5, and 6 values. The middle values, the mid values. Therefore, I wouldn't go any darker than a value 7, which is normally an evergreen tree over here. And that's just to show contrast. So I skip 3 values from till I get to the 10. I don't use those because you lose the color. Again, we can go more into that if you join my online classes. You can ask the question again. I can have my I have a whole bunch of slides available where I can show you exactly what I mean, and we can emphasize that and keep talking about that when I'm doing the painting live. But yeah, I think in 3. Oh yeah, thanks for the book there. Yeah, my book is published on again, Northlight published that book. The company that I've worked for, they sold that to Penguin Random House. But yes, I got my book published by the same company I'm working for, and it's called Landscape Painting Essentials, available in Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It's got information there that you probably will not see in another book. Okay, there's another moody painting here, Jude. Okay, let's put all this together.
Bring it. Bring it.
Let's put this all together now. I did the swerved kind of reflections where it's not exactly a repetition of what's on the ground. A good composition also would be that you decide, am I going to, okay, we got 3 masses here. I got the sky, which is 1 mass. I'm trying to fit all this information in quickly. You got the vertical mass and you got the horizontal mass. All right.
What's a mass?
A mass is well, I make it very simple. There's a lot of talk about this, but the way I do it, I simplify and say, am I going to dedicate more square inches to the sky, more square inches to the vertical, or more square inches to the horizontal? And so in this case, I opted to dedicate more space to the vertical mass, which is occupying about, I don't know, maybe 60% of the pictorial space. So that way you don't compete with the water and the vertical masses. So you can see that the darkers are lighter in the water. We have the shimmer here. See that shimmer? And I didn't put any reflections right over here, so it gives a little bit more sense of depth there. It all came together, right? Okay. How to use now, talking about water, we went through the anatomy of water reflections. We talked about the different water motion with wind and shimmers. The stage number 3 now would be how to use rivers and streams as visual paths. Now, artists are always, and I would say 90% or even more of paintings, artists set it up in such a way where they like to draw the viewer in from the very bottom of the painting, which is the immediate foreground, and usher the viewer all the way to the back of the painting. That's pretty much a standard, right? So there's the two most important things, and I know this has nothing to do with water today, but I wanted to mention it because I think it's so important. The two most important aspects, and unfortunately the least emphasized in workshops and books or anything, the two most important aspects is the asymmetrical shape design and linear movement. There's a lot to say about this, but if you are able to master those two concepts, your paintings will improve substantially. Okay, so for now, we're going to focus just on the linear movement because that's what we do that with water. So artists tend to use water, streams, rivers, brooks to draw the viewer in. I would say easily 80% of my paintings contain this. You just go to Pinterest and type in landscape paintings and you'll see one after another, always relying on water mostly for that because there's so many things that you can do with it. That's why I decided to give this presentation today because it's one of the most important things that you can paint. Okay, so artists create contour lines that lead viewers' eyes in an interesting way. The more we move the viewers, the more pleasant the painting will be. So as you can see, of all my experience, I've come to this conclusion. The success in a painting is not in its realism. It's in how pleasantly you're moving the viewer throughout the painting. Not only in water, but in tree lines, tree contours, everything. Everything that has to do with eye movement. When the viewer feels that there's a rhythmic eye movement, a melodic eye movement, the viewer adopts the painting and says, I like that painting, it looks real, I feel like I'm living in it, I'm visiting that place. There's something that happens with the viewer's mind, but that's the number one goal for artists is to achieve those lines rather than pursue reality or realism. And that also applies to portraits, still lifes, pet portraits, everything's about lines. We'll talk about that much more in the future classes. So the thing is, the more we move the viewers, the more pleasant the painting will be. The goal is to take them into the depth as much as we can so they feel that they're advancing in the illusion of space. That's the trick right there. The viewer has to feel that he or she is walking through the illusion of space. Okay, so when the body of water is the main mass, dedicate 2/3 of the space to it. Okay, so let's see what we're talking about here. So, of course, I relied on this stream to create this is what I refer to as a melodic line. This is a huge concept. I'm telling you, if you have not taken these classes before, and you pick up on that melodic line, if you understand that melodic line, it's like giving you a string on your guitar. It is vital and essential to understand that. Okay, so now when you create a body of water, make sure that the two sides are completely different. That this one zigzags more, this one's a little bit more of a straight kind of pattern. Keep going, keep going. Creating this linear movement here. There's a little shadow side to that snow mound over here. You connect to that. You go. I purposely opened the goal posts here so the viewer can go in, and now you go all the way to the back. See, that's more important than the realism. Another important thing is you create a gradient plane in this body of water. Over here you have a warm touch of orange, and here you have like a purpley blue. Cool. That's called the gradient plane, a huge concept. It is better to move the eye from left to right if you're reading in languages that go that way. Obviously, in some countries, it would be the other way around. But I'm furnishing this here for just that's because I just generalized it. But obviously, I'm making a point. I think if you read Arabic, it's the other way around. So you would invert this. Okay, so since you are moving the viewer's eye, there are 3 ways to do it. One is an implied S. Second, implied C. And I'm talking implied. S-ish, C-ish, and straight-ish. The number one way to move a viewer in a painting is this one. This is a second option, but not as good. And definitely the implied straight should be right out, should be in the garbage. Let's look at some examples. This is an S-line composition. It starts from the front. See, there's an implied S here. Very pleasant. You don't have to go all the way to the depth, because now the viewer can read that as being too obvious that you're trying to do that. Oh, they sense that there's an instinct where they say, well, you're just completely taking me all the way to the back. So as long as you usher the viewer somewhat to the background, you've done your job as an artist. Here's a C shape, a C composition. This is a watercolor, by the way. This is in Yosemite National Park. I think it's the aftermath of Vernal Falls. But you can see the C movement here. Of course, I slow it down with melodic lines and everything. So I rely on these rocks here. Here, I'll just follow my pattern here. So when I'm painting these water scenes and rocks, I am not thinking in rocks and water. That's meaningless to me because I know I have to create a symbol of everything anyway. What I'm focusing on is, am I creating a pleasant line? And what can I rely on, because I can't use ink in a painting, what can I rely on to create that melodic line? Well, the contour rocks. That's what counts the most. You got that right, you got everything right. Now this is an S movement, but several times. Look how much you're moving back and forth in this painting. Woo, 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 all the way over here. I call that a pendulum movement. You know, a pendulum is like one of those grandfather clocks. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. And it becomes a very pleasing composition because now you're really taking the viewer for a mental stroll back and forth from side to side to your painting. I consider this a success just because of that, this watercolor. And you can see there's no realism in this whatsoever. This is like playful watercolor. Okay, the fourth most part of this presentation. We learned the difference between how much motion there is on top of the lakes, what to use with reflections. We've learned the anatomy of reflections, and we've learned how to use water to create visual paths. The fourth one is, how do I indicate that it's a river, a stream, or a lake? Well, it's very simple. Here's your formula. A small body of water, such as a stream or brook, is indicated when both sides originate from the bottom, unless it's an aerial photo. Okay, so if I originate one line from here and one line both at the bottom, I am telling you, the viewer, that it's a small body of water. It's a narrow body of water. For example, this one here. This is a perfect example. If I put one line at the bottom and another at the side, now I'm telling you it's a little bit wider. That usually becomes the illusion of a river. If I don't bring any lines out from the bottom of the painting, but both on the sides, now I'm telling you it's a large body of water, either a very wide Mississippi River or it's a lake. Pretty cool, right? So if you want your river to seem like it's big enough, make sure that one of the sides of the river starts from the side, the vertical edge of the painting, not just the horizontal edge. Okay, this is just a side note here. You want to always measure the distance to make sure that from here to here, you don't have the same distance. It just seems too humanly manufactured when you do that. Neither do you want a line that's originating from the middle, and definitely not from a corner, because then it's too obvious that, oh, it's got a lot of human interference in that painting. Your painting should look humanly manufactured, but not humanly deliberately, mistakenly starting lines and shapes that are not supposed to be there. Okay. Do not let photos rule over you. This is a scene also in Yellowstone National Park. The river is flat. It's all one blue-gray color. It would be a boring carbon copy. The mass needs to be graded in value. Adding water foam will make it more entertaining. So you add these things. For example, here, well, that's not the same one, but I'll show you some examples coming up. Okay, when you have a dock or you're looking underneath a bridge, you can't just reflect the bridge vertically. You have to look under it, and you need to reflect what's under the bridge or what's under the house. How would you indicate a small pond? I think you'd have to go out by two sides, but you'd have to do it by, in that case, you're going to have to, let me see if I got a painting that has a pond. This one maybe has a pond. You know how you can tell it's a pond? Because you'd probably have trees that are pretty big at the end, so it wouldn't read like a lake, right? So if you have a lake, like let's say over here, okay, here's a good example. That appears as a pond because we have these at the end of it, right? So it can't be a lake. On the other hand, oh, this is interesting. Just like it answered your question perfectly well, stereotyped answer. This is a lake because it's so big that by you comparing the size of these miniature evergreen trees back here, it's telling you that that's a large body of water. Because why are the trees so small? That means there's a lot of yards from here to the back. Whereas here, this is definitely a pond. It reads as a pond because we have a bush and we have an evergreen tree that's cropped out that's so big, there's no way this can be a lake. So here we have a mixture of a lake and a pond. Perfect answer, right, Nancy? The gods of art are with us today. The gods, the art gods. Now, I'm not calling myself a god. I mean the art gods in general. That just happened to come up with that answer. Yeah, again, by perspective, if this obviously is a stream or a brook, a very small body of water, because look how huge those evergreen trees are that are placed around it, right? So that, again, you just do that measurement. Okay, here's a simple formula to create ice. You take... My formula is a little bit confusing, but if I do it visually, you'll understand. You take the value of the snow over here. Let's say that's a value 4. Then you take the value of the water, which is a 7. Okay, let's call it 6 so we get an even number. 6 plus 4 equals 10. Divided by 2 equals 5, which is the value of your ice. Pretty cool, right? There's the value of your ice. It's a midway between the snow and the water. So you can see water, ice, snow. You can't go wrong. Now remember what I said earlier. You don't want to depict ice that comes out of your refrigerator. If you want it to look like it's natural, add a little bit of burnt sienna or add some yellow ochre to it, so that, because actually ice does that for some strange reason. When it freezes over, it captures the muddiness of the water and it suspends it, And you'll see those colors when you look at it. Okay, let's look at waterfalls now. I said it was going to be very complete, right? So we have a complete presentation here. Here's my little mascot. All right. The water edge should not coincide with the center. Both contours should be obviously different. So you look at this contour, and this contour should be very, very different. I even added the evergreen tree for that purpose, so it wouldn't even look remotely the same. And make sure that none of these lines run down the center. So normally when I create waterfalls, I don't have them come straight down. I always bring them down on an angle anyway, like a diagonal. So it's not coinciding with the center part. But what you do want to have is more mass of square inches of rocks on this side or on this side, when possible. Okay, just like with portraits, you measure the distance from side to side. So you take, for example, the measurement from here to here should not be the same as from here to here, then from here to here, then from here to here. I think there's a little bit of a contradiction there. I don't know if I got the full painting, but yeah, at least it should make it. Well, maybe these two are the same here, so this should be cropped right about there. Something like that anyway. Do as I say, not as I do. Okay, now when you have your camera in either your cell phone, well, actually most people use smartphones now. Only professional use DSLR cameras. But this would be a typical snapshot where you take the photo and there's something awkward about this water. Did you say the top of the fall should not be at the center of the origin? Yeah, that would be obvious too, right? The top of the fall should not. That's a good suggestion. Like, okay, I'm glad you brought that up.
And then Elizabeth is asking about water on sea. How do you depict seascapes?
I have that over here too. I don't think I can get into it, but I can touch that very briefly because I don't know how much time we have. We'll see how we do with time. But yeah, so yeah, that's obvious, right? Because you want to have the water comfortably off the middle point, comfortably off it. A ballerina tree. I'll now that Jay brought that up. See, my students know exactly my moves. I love you guys. Yeah, I think it's a really neat way to, when you have a patch of evergreen trees, you put, like, I call this a little ballerina, where you isolate this tree from the group. You create a little peekaboo over here, and it just stops that. Because if I don't have it, you end up sort of like an implied rectangle. So this stops the idea that it's an implicit rectangle. This is Athabasca Falls in Canada, by the way, for those who didn't recognize it. I had it professionally made, the mascot, Painterly. You like him? do. Anyway, okay. Now, back to this. So you take the picture, and the shutter can open at 1/500th of a second. Not even a blink of an eye. But we don't see things like that. The camera is much faster than how the eye registers. Do this little example. Wave your hand in front of you, and look at the wrinkles of your knuckles, and just move your hand like the same speed that water would flow. And you'll see that you cannot register the hard edges on your hand. So anything that's moving, you cannot determine the hard edge. But if you're not trained, if you didn't take Joe's workshop, you might fall for the trap and depict it like this. I've seen this many times on Pinterest, and I've seen artists portray water like this, and it just doesn't look right. So if you want It looks just like me but not with all the gray hairs now, Guinea. When they did that mascot, that was like, I don't know, years ago. I didn't have all the gray hair. Okay, anyway. But the water seems to be suspended, like frozen in the middle of the air, right? So the formula to that, to make it look like the water is moving, is just to blur it, allowing some of the sense of your eye can register, like a little bit of a hard edge here and there, but not really a really strong hard edge, just sort of like a blurry kind of, you can focus somewhere. That's the right way to do it. So you got to, this is what you won't see this if you're plein air painting, or you see it, well, you will on a photograph, but not when you're plein air painting. But this is how you would normally see it if you're plein air painting. And of course I'm exaggerating that, right? Concept here is white paint or white watercolor paper. Yes, it provides the lightest light, the brightest light, value number 1. But the problem with this is it's a note of silence. So it's okay to have a little bit of white water or white snow, but if you have too much of it, it becomes a note of silence because there's no color in it. So if let's say you want to paint Niagara Falls and the sun's hitting it to the front of the wall of water, you're just going to have a lot of white water and the painting will not succeed. This is why I indicated this, that one of the beautiful things about these kind of waterfalls is that I limited the whites to just certain areas near the top. And all of this became colorful because that's very hard for me for color to read in a white. Yes, you can use an off-white and add a little bit of ochre to it, or orange or pink, so you get an off-white, but since it's such a high value, it's very difficult for people to actually read the color in that. But if you work with the value 4, 5s, and 6s, like we have over here, this is where all the richness of the color is showing. So one advantage of not using too much white water is that you can throw all these beautiful colors in there. Violets, turquoise, oranges, blues, right? Same thing with snow. That's exactly what I did here. So I contained my white to a limited area. That's about it. And the rest of it became darkened. So that white glows more. See, nothing kills light more than a lot of light. I know it sounds funny, but look at it as an analogy of candlelight. A romantic dinner with 3 candles on a table looks nice. But if you fill the whole room up with light, then the 3 candles will not show anymore. They will not outstand anymore. So if you want your light or your white water to be outstanding, dedicate just a small section of your painting to that light. So that's exactly what I did there. And of course I got a little bit of that orange in the sky and I bounced it. You can barely see it. There's a little bit of an off-white there. So I echoed that. Okay, this is an example of a painting where this is a watercolor. I played with color here. Go ahead, Jude.
Hargraves is asking, in general, how does one produce higher values in paintings? By adding titanium white?
If it's an oil, yes. But there's the medium that will give you the most light is a watercolor over any other medium. The reason for that, there's an interesting reason for that, is that when you're painting a watercolor, you put like sunglasses on, you're painting a film, a transparent film of pigment. You're not painting a mound, like you're not painting a mound of paint. So what happens is when the light travels, it goes through the sunglasses, quotation marks, film, bounces through that film back into your eye. So it carries the white paper with it. Whereas with oils and pastels and acrylics, that doesn't happen. So watercolors are always more brilliant. They survive in a dark corner without a halogen light on it. Whereas oil paintings, they basically, if you're going to put it in a dark room somewhere, you better just get a light and light it up. It is quite noticeable, the difference. Anyway, this was a playful watercolor. I'm very happy with it, where I threw in all those irregular colors that you would never see with the eye. Purples and oranges and blues. I mean, this is what watercolor is all about. This is the way it's supposed to be painted. And so the lesson here was to show first of all, the limited white on the top, so I can bounce all these purples and greens in there. Secondly, make sure that if you have one side that's running down like this, the other one should be dramatically different. So you can see this one's going on a diagonal, and then I inserted these rocks over here. Now another cool thing that you can do is, so that the water looks semi-transparent, allow some of the rocks, like I equate this to the bridal veil. You know, bride, you can barely see her face through the veil. So you put the bridal veil technique where you show rocks that are hinted in the curtain of water, but the water's flowing over them, so that would be the bridal veil. And it makes it look more natural that way. I used, incidentally, I used sandpaper. You can see the texture. Let me zoom in here for you. I use sandpaper at the top of that waterfall, coarse sandpaper, to create that bubbly effect. So the technique is, no matter, regardless of the medium, is create a little sense of hard edge somewhere, right where the water is going to topple over, because it's not really moving that fast yet. And once gravity takes hold of it, soften it. So you go harder edged here, and gradually go softer, softer, softer over here until you even get the mist like over here. That's the technique.
Leslie is wondering, what do you think about watercolor pencils?
I haven't used them much. I use them more for add-ons. If you feel assertive with them, if you're good at drawing, they could be very useful. Some people are better at drawing. Some people are better with brushes. I like the brushes because I use as you'll see day after tomorrow, in my workshop, you're going to see how I use the sleight of the hand with my brushes, where I can drag them and push them around like shoveling snow and creating all these effects pretty much accidentally, not really drawing. I don't really draw my rocks and stuff, and it's strange how that happens, but you've seen me do it, right? The rest of the students here have seen me do that. That's why I always like brushes. But if you're comfortable with pencils, sure, you can do that. And then you can also wet the watercolor pencils as well. Okay, so this is Iguazu Falls in Brazil, and the idea here is, you can see that there's a little indentation in the water here. Another one over here. So when you're doing the waterfalls, instead of it just being one flat wall, visualize a curtain. So if I go like that with a curtain, you have those indentations. Of course, they wouldn't be that symmetrical, but it's just a reminder. I'm going to take this off so you don't become too influenced in it. And of course, I made sure that every waterfall would be different in size and they're vertical. Okay, this is Sturgeon Falls, I believe. This is here in Ontario. Nice setup, but there's one problem. Everything is, remember I said the two most important things in planning your painting are asymmetrical shapes and linear movement. Here we have what we would refer to as visually implicit symmetrical shape, which now becomes a square. Just because you have little variations does not offset it enough to take away the implicit. Okay, so I would it's very simple, right? You got you have a question here. Which of these two shapes is more appealing, the square or the rectangle? I think the answer is pretty obvious, right? The square is the least or the less appealing because it has the same distance from side to side, whereas here this has one shorter and longer line to it. So the same thing applies to trees. If a tree can fit inside of a square box, it's a no-no. If the tree can fit inside of an oval box or a rectangle, you're good to go. Try to do that here. Try to make a tree work in here. I dare you. No matter what you do, it'll never work. Okay, the same thing with a waterfall. Try to make a waterfall work if it's in a square format. By the way, you can see here the bridal veil sort of thing peeking through those rocks in the photograph. You could see like this, there's a rock here that's partially covered by water, but you can see a little bit through it, and that creates a really nice effect. Okay, so when you have something like this, you have two options. Don't paint it or stretch it. So I can go like this and go, erase this. I can use artist license and stretch it. Then I have a more appealing format. However, that being said, still rectangular-ish or implied rectangular-ish waterfalls that are horizontal are not as effective as the vertical ones, because you don't really feel the water dropping. So, where do I have an example of that? Yeah, okay. So I would recommend that here you do this. If it's a vertical waterfall, paint it on a, let me see if I stretch it the other way. By the way, you can resolve this with a thumbnail sketch on location. You don't have to copy this. Thumbnail sketches are not to copy the scene, it's to reinterpret it. Yeah, this looks better. See, obviously when I go like this and I create a rectangular kind of waterfall, we have an improvement. The only thing is you won't really be true to the anatomy of that place, which I don't care. You'll never catch me saying, oh, it's not, I'm trying to represent the real place, because I don't care. This is another watercolor. This is Bow Falls, also in Canada. Wow, I got a lot of Canadian scenes here. Okay, you can use tools such as sandpaper, I mentioned this already earlier, or pastels to show sparkles for watercolor. Heavy and pastel should be used for oils and acrylics. Okay, where are we now? Don't forget to reflect the white water in your pond if it's still. Don't leave that out. So sometimes I hit myself over my head because I forget that. That's why I'm saying don't forget it. Okay, another example of limited white water, only contained to small area, therefore it stands out much nicer. When you do introduce such a bright color, take it all the way and anchor it to the edge. It's not, there's a little bit of an interruption there, but I'm using the peekaboo technique. But somehow it's close enough to the edge to anchor that. Don't leave it floating in the middle. Any white water should not be floating right in the middle of the painting, if you can avoid it. How are we doing with time? Yeah, we're doing well. We're covering a lot. That's why we called it All You Need to Know About Painting Water. Am I not?
an earlier question on seascapes. Do you have time
I
to say anything about that?
I do. I have it planned over here. Look, I just in case that we have enough time. There's a few. See all the seascapes here. So been there, done that. You can see them already planned.
We knew you would be.
Yeah. Do I ever fail you?
Not in the 11 plus years I've been with you.
Only my my city, Hamilton, Ontario, electricity failed me. All right.
You are forgiven, Joe. That's once in a million times.
Okay. So here are some buyer beware kind of recommendations. I think this is called Victoria Falls, and it's by Glacier National Park somewhere. I don't know exactly where. Do you see the problem with this? It's got a very nice setup, and the water's flowing. There's two problems with this. Number one, you can't see the top of the waterfall. So I recommend that whenever it's possible, show the very top of the waterfall. Use artist license and change that. So you take some of that white water. Like if I was standing here on location, I would modify that. I'd take this white water and put it right over here. So you can see further into the distance. So it doesn't seem like the water's just running out from the frame. But the problem is that the water hits a dead end. The rocks are covering it, and now you don't feel that it's flowing. So you need to use artistic license and bring the water over the rocks and let it flow more. Another problem is that when you take a photograph and if you're not aiming the shutter at something, at the water directly, it's going to register the darkness of the rocks, and it's going to bleach out the white water and turn everything into white. And you copy that. That's not how you would see this scene in real life. This is in Jackson, Wyoming. Teton National Park. So there's no way you'd have that much white water. The eye can see more ranges of values than any camera can. Yeah, that would be considered a tangent. That's correct. This is called Moose Falls. Big problem here. When I do these plein air paintings, I laugh at myself and I say, nice try. You actually think I'm going to fall for your little trap where you want to punch me out, Mother Nature, where you have one side of the waterfall basically parallel with the other, almost forming a perfect implicit rectangle? Nice try. That's not going to work with me. So you need to modify that. How I would do that is I'd take some more water coming right over this rock over here, like that, like I did earlier in this painting. The first thing I would do is I'd look at the waterfall and more or less make a mental calculation, say, well, is the distance from here the same about from here to here? Yeah, it probably is. It's a rectangle. Then I'll look at both sides and say, okay, the water line here, is it the same as over here? Yeah, pretty much the same. So I would implement exactly what I showed you earlier with this water color. The two different sides to it, right? Okay, again, I imported this from my my previous reference to the S movement. You can see that very clearly here. Again, this has too much white water to it. This is a good composition. This could work as a painting. Professional artists will mount, remember I showed you this earlier? So that would be a walk-by snapshot of the waterfall. But professional photographers, they like to set their camera up on a tripod, and then they program it to keep the aperture open a little bit longer. So they try to do the best way possible to convey the idea that the water is moving. So they go to the two extremes. They go to water that doesn't even look like it's naturally moving versus water frozen in time, which is this one. The trick is the in between, is to do it right in between. Don't freeze it in midair, but also don't make it that smooth. It doesn't look right. I guess that's something that you can learn to do when you're painting plein air, is that you will paint the way the eye naturally sees the water. This also has a problem that you're not seeing the top of the waterfall. So again, it looks like the water is just born out of nowhere. Which is what I'm mentioning here. Some waterfalls are so tall that you will not see the top. If the reference is used at face value, the waterfall will appear to be cut out and glued on. Yeah, that's the problem in a painting. Not so much in a photograph, but in a painting it actually looks like you cut it out and paste it on because it just suddenly appears out of nowhere. That's a problem right there. So I did a little bit of photoshopping on it, and you can sort of see the top of it as if you're standing above it on top of a cliff rather than under it. So you're allowing the viewer to see a portion of the water, which is what I did here too. You can see the top part of that, and you can see the top part of this. So it gives you more sense of 3 dimensions. Okay, I already showed that one. Yeah, it's difficult to make, wait. Oh yeah, the recommendation is here. If your waterfall is vertical, portray it on a vertical canvas. If your waterfall is horizontal, then portray it on a horizontal canvas. So let's say I would use an 11 by 14 or 16 by 20 for this waterfall. And for this one, I would use a 12 by 16 or an 18 by 24 or whatever because of that. Okay, I like to insert little jelly beans in between my waterfalls to make it look more natural. And then again, the bridal veil sort of, you can see it's semi-transparent there. This was a quick sketch. You can see, however, how much an advantage it is to have the white water on top. This was so important because I couldn't show you the top of the waterfall here. Remember I said that. It's very important to show the top of the waterfall so it doesn't seem like it's glued on. But you can get away with it as long as the second fall of it, I'm showing this part of the waterfall. So it doesn't have to be the very top one. As long as a portion of your waterfall, you're showing the top of it. Okay, this basically says the white part of the waterfall, which is this, should have oranges, yellows, or pinks, depending on your scheme here. So I got a red tree here. It should have pink in there. I got yellow tree over here. Yellow orange, it should have yellow orange in here. So you keep bouncing these colors around, even in the highlights. Never use white right out of the tube. It's void of any color. It's white, titanium white right out of the tube is considered to be a cool color, not a warm color. This is Niagara Falls on the American side. Place mist at the bottom to create mist. Okay, well. Especially for tall waterfalls with lots of water thrust. So they really give that feeling that the gravity is really taking its course. Boom, the water is banging against those rocks. Add mist to it. Even if it's, I even do it anyway, even if it's a small waterfall. It just takes the rigidness away. Okay, so that covers the waterfalls, lakes, linear paths. We covered it all. Let's take a look at, we got a little bit of time? Yeah, it's only we'll do a little bit of seascapes to make this a complete presentation today. How does that sound? By the way, Mermer, I just caught your latest comment there where it says, "Are you all members of Artist Network?" I think almost all. I mean, all my students are. That's for sure. But just to give you a little bit of history of Artist Network, it's the leader in art that publishes art-related materials, teaching materials. If you go to a bookstore and you look at the magazine rack, they predominate with magazines. So if you've ever opened the Artist magazine or Watercolor magazine or Pastel Journal, that's from that company that I work for. In fact, right now I am in the magazine there. They're advertising these courses in the magazine. If you go to a bookstore, you'll see me there with the. I have 3 secrets. We're publishing 3 secrets per month on tips for artists to improve their paintings. Half a page.
Okay, but it's important to note you should not buy the monthly subscription because they do not offer Joe's courses on that monthly subscription.
Yeah, well, people have bought the membership expecting it to include. No, those are 2 separate things. But the membership includes all the other materials. There's like 2 things happening. The live online classes. You don't have to be a member to take my online classes, which are live. And the membership won't cover the online classes. Well, thank you, Scott. See, he's grateful. He says he's glad that I'm working for them. That's nice. Okay, anatomy of a wave. This is a watercolor. And so this time I opted to give more square inches to the sky. What was the question specifically about seascapes again?
She just wanted to know how you paint water in the sea.
Okay, I'll give you the anatomy of it. Anyway, when it comes to the wave, this is what's very important. Remember I said earlier, the 2 most important facets of a painting would be asymmetrical shapes and linear movement. Now, I've coined some phrases, and I have not read this anywhere, never heard about it. The interesting thing is that the linear movement is the most neglected concept in all workshops and books, and yet it's the #1 essence of it. And I'm so glad that my book, actually, I published it and I was able to emphasize that so I can look back at my life and say, at least someone said it. But it needs to be followed up with a lot of examples. If I had had that information when I started almost 30 years ago, I would have skipped at least 15 years of hard work if I had gotten this information. It all boiled down to many years later I got it. So I'm very enthusiastic about sharing it because I do believe that what I'm going to mention right now is the holy grail of all artistic design, which is the line. So I coined something that's called a graceful line. And the way that works is if you follow my contour here, okay, so I went from graceful over here. This is why this painting is a success in my mind. Now I change it to a melodic line, which resembles a broken staircase, an irregular staircase. And then I go back to the graceful line, which has curves in it. And it sort of like resembles a roller coaster. So when I'm designing these paintings, I'm not thinking about waves or rocks or trees. I'm thinking about I need graceful lines, which is the roller coaster effect, the melodic line, which is the broken staircase effect or irregular staircase effect. There's another one there. When you add those 2 components to your landscapes or anything, even portraits, John Singer Sargent knew this. Andrew Loomis knew this. It just wasn't coined. So when you add those 2 facets to any painting, you have a recipe for success. And there it is. There's another seascape over there where we have the roller coaster effect. See the up, see this here resembles, wait. This high note over here, the top of the roller coaster, simulates this. Then this simulates that. So this way you won't forget. Look at the movement here in the roller coaster, right? So you take the viewer for a mental ride, a visual ride. So it's not about waves, it's not about rocks, it's about lines. Okay, so here this is about your seascapes. Seascapes are probably the easiest painting subject because the information is applicable to almost all the themes. So once you learn the anatomy of a wave, it's the same everywhere. That waves are waves are waves. Except maybe the light of the day can change, a twilight. For example, here I play with the different times of day, so I created a twilight scene with the water. But basically the anatomy of waves are going to be the same regardless of the time of the day. Okay. Okay, where am I now? Okay, here. So the anatomy works like this. What artists really exploit is this, what I call, well, I don't call it, it is called the eye of the wave right there. That is, most of the time, that becomes the focal point of a seascape artist. And the reason you have that phenomena is very simple. The wind is pushing the water. It creates a pyramid effect, like a shark fin. The water's thicker over here at the bottom, therefore it's darker. But as it thins out, the light of the sun goes through it, and you get that beautiful turquoise effect that we exploit. So that's already answering your question, isn't it? The advantage of me doing these live classes is also, I wasn't just like a natural person that could just go out in the field and start painting out of sheer talent and instinct. I needed this kind of information that I got by reverse engineering the top artists in the world, dedicating a lot of time to analyzing their paintings and figure out the common denominators. But where all of you are or have been, I've been there too. So when you, even sometimes when you go halfway through a question, I've already struggled with it and have been able to solve it. It's not old news for me. I know exactly where the problems go with artists, exactly where they go. Which makes me, sorry, with modesty apart, makes me a very good teacher because I've been there, done that, and I've gone through the same hurdles that all of you have gone through. And I still do to a point. I can't say I'm exempt from them. So here's a list of recommendations, golden nuggets I call them for seascapes. That answers your question perfectly well. I can't go into all the details with it, but let's see what you can extract from here. The horizon line where the water meets the sky should be convex, but not noticeable to the eyes because the earth is round. So a lot of mistakes that people make is they make a perfectly straight line and the viewer somehow senses something's wrong with it. So this here should be a little bit of a curvature, very, very subtle. Should not even be noticeable unless you put a ruler on it. Number 2, avoid many hard edges where spray or foam is present. Lost and found edges are pleasing. So if we look at this guy over here, there's a little trick that I'm playing with you. Right over here, the water is rushing up into the air, but there's a moment where it stops. That becomes a hard edge because it's not moving any longer. Besides, I need your eye to focus on something because if everything's out of focus, then it's disturbing to the viewer too. It looks like a camera that's trying to focus. So you create little small areas, an inch or so of hard edges where the eye can find that focus, only to drop again and become soft edge. That's the trick. What's also very important is when you're near the edges of your painting, soft edged. Soft edged. I call that the peripheral area. You don't want to have this edge compete with this one. That's why this is all misty and soft and that one isn't. So this, obviously this here is the star of the painting, right? Okay, this here is the star. Oops, I'll just close my arrow. Doesn't like when I click, 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 click like that. And again, we get that nice roller coaster ride, don't we? Whee! Also important that when you create the wave, make sure you don't have a parallel eye movement. This is a little bit here, but I have to because the bottom cannot be so pillowy. Keep the strong foam away from the edges. Create the visual path. Melodic line. You go out of the painting, come back in again. See, it's all strategically placed. In order to block the straight line in the horizon, what did I do? Put a little wave coming on top of it. So again, I get a little bit more of a graceful line up here. It's all strategically designed. This also takes your eye for a movement, a ride from here, goes up here to the focal point. So as you can see, it's not about painting water. The person that asked the question earlier. It's about, I need graceful, melodic lines, and the elements of my landscape, I use them as tools for the sole purpose of creating that line. So first goes the line, and then goes the rocks. First goes the graceful line, and then goes the seascape foam, not the other way around. Because ultimately, you're not really painting rocks, and you're not really painting foam. You're painting lines. On a two-dimensional surface, such as a watercolor paper or canvas, they are lines. Okay, create a pillow effect by adding cool blue and violets under the foam part, just like with clouds. Add warm reflected light in the shadow area. That's cool. In other words, you want your your seascape to look three-dimensional. Actually, I should have taken that photograph off. You just see the lines. Yeah, so what you do is you add a light on that side, and as this turns like a pillow, this gets darker over here. That gives that 3D effect. Light on that side where the sun is, and it gets darker on that side. That's the anatomy of a wave. As with snow and waterfalls, limit your whites. Exactly what I'm doing here. This is a very prototype painting, by the way, of Seascape. It's fulfilled. It's crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's with movement and everything. With the mood, everything. So it's a good stereotype for me to lecture on. What did I say here? Yeah, limit your whites. And white is in parentheses or quotation marks. See, you can see that for this light to stand out, it only appears in a small amount. Everything else is subdued. That's why it looks so attractive, because it's very little of it. It is recommended not to have white clouds in the sky so as not to stack the values if you're creating white foam. Yeah, so that is a standard. You can see that a lot in professional artist seascapes. You have these two options. Subdued sky. In other words, subdued meaning not a lot of value contrast, no hard edges, no extreme lights. Subdued sky. But then you have non-subdued wave. Brilliant wave. Or the reverse is true. You can convert this into a Skyscape.
In watercolor, do you use a masking fluid for foams?
I would use masking tape, but I would bend it just a little bit. What I would do is I'd draw the line with a ruler, a T ruler. And then I would, when I'm doing that, I would put the masking tape just like a 1/16 of an inch in the middle, a little bit higher, and then sort of like try to round it off just a bit to get that convex horizon line. Now
no, white foam on your waves.
For watercolor, no, I paint around it. I don't use masking fluid that much, Erkin. I just carve into it because I like to take my brush. You know what? If you join me next Saturday, it's going to be somewhat improvised. I'm just going to improvise a bunch of vignettes. If you ask me, if you bring it up, we got 5 hours together. I will demonstrate to you how to do that wave with watercolor. I just do sections like this. But just to give you an answer now, I would carve into it like shoveling snow. I would turn my brush upside down. I'll sort of like see if I can draw that for you. See, I'm going to take requests this Saturday. So pretend this is a shovel. This is my brush. I push into it and provoke, with the sleight of the hand, I provoke the broken up dry brush effect that gives me that foam. So that's this Saturday, day after tomorrow, from 1 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, $14.99, will be a follow-up of this presentation. Here I'm uploading a lot of intellectual information, but it's missing the demos to make it complete. Next Saturday will be the complement to this, which will be the demonstrations. Not so much the lecturing. I might remind you of a few things, but I'm not going to go lengthy talking. And then that'll tie everything up on a bow very nicely. You get the complete course on painting water. Believe me, after that, you've done it. You got it. You got all the information. So $14.99 to learn all these concepts? I would have grabbed that 30 years ago in a heartbeat. But they didn't have online classes then. Okay, so what you can do is the opposite. I can turn this into a skyscape, make the sky be the star, and then subdue the waves, which is in a certain way what I did here. So by putting the moon in there and putting the shining in there of the moon against the clouds, I subdued all the waves in the water so they wouldn't compete, they wouldn't stack. Okay, we're almost done here. By the top of the hour, we'll be done. A 2-hour presentation is pretty decent. Okay, seascapes can be set up to have a high horizon line. I'm reading number 7, by the way. A high horizon line or a low one. It depends what I want to emphasize. Do I want to emphasize more the water, or do I want to emphasize the sky? Well, let's look at an example. In this case, I emphasized the horizontal plane, correct? So I gave it just barely enough sky so it wouldn't feel suffocated. But there's a lot of, like, what is there? 75% of the water in the rocks, right? The horizontal plane. But in this case, which is common with seascapes, but not always, in this case, the reverse is true. I emphasized the sky and I downplayed the horizontal plane because I wanted to convey that feeling of a stormy sky. So it all depends what you're going after. They both work. Just that whatever large mass that you're going to have, this is called a mass, by the way, the sky, make sure that whatever you put in here has tons of enriched visual information and not just some boring blue sky like this over here. That's boring. So if you don't have much of a sky to work with because there isn't enough visual richness, crop it. Crop it as much as possible. But if you have the storm, the effects, the sunset, and the sea and the water, then put both of them in, but only one should give. You shouldn't have 50% water or 50% horizontal plane and 50% sky. It should be at least a ratio of 33-66% about, the give or take. In this case, the water was emphasized. Very clearly, you can see the visual movement here, right? Go to my wave. And then all this is out of focus, of course. Rock contours and crevices should be greatly simplified. That's in general when you do rocks. That belongs more in a rock course, but you don't want to make your rocks too busy. When showing people on a beach, most adults that will have the horizon line, we don't really run across the middle part of their head. That's Anders Zorn. Go check out his work. That he'll hold true to that. When possible, portion of the wave can cover the horizon line to slow down the eye. Yeah, that's a good one. That's an important one. Problem with horizon lines in general is, again, you do not want the eye to move too quickly. That's a straight line should be avoided in paintings. So this here, that would be artistic suicide to put that line there. So what I would do is emphasize this wave and go above that so I can block that visual thrust that's moving too quickly, maybe a second time too. And then that way I get that roller coaster effect rather than just following that straight line, because it becomes a monorail. People do not pay money to get on a monorail or a bullet train unless they want to go somewhere. You don't pay money to get on a bullet train to have fun. You pay money to go to a theme park, to go on a roller coaster, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, you want the viewer to move up and down on the roller coaster effect, not in a straight line. What do you want to go on, a bullet train or a roller coaster? Well, I want to go on a roller coaster. Well, there you go. Okay, where are we now? We're almost done. To indicate rocks are wet, add skylight to the shadow planes. Yeah, that is important here. I did that. Check the subtle blues on the rocks, especially at the top. Blue here, touches of blue over here, because water's splashing on top of them, right? But not only because there's a logical reason behind it, it's because I want to echo the sky colors throughout the painting for color harmony. So I add that to the rocks. Okay. I think we're done. One more thing here. We're done. This is what I would call a stacking effect. When you have, well, this is not really stacking because this is darker, but you got a white wave over here, which, by the way, is pretty ugly. See, this is why you just can't paint what you see. You got to change it. Shape-wise, this photograph is plagued with problems. It's got a tangent over here. The linear movement is from side to side too quickly. The sky is boring. We do have a melodic line here that we can use. There is some graceful line on top of this seascape over here. This is the wave. Again, another line running too quickly from side to side instead of bringing you from the front in. A very skilled seascape artist will actually draw you from the foreground using foam or rocks from the foreground into the depth of painting, thinking front to back rather than side to side. Side to side is not a good policy for a line. But anyway, the stacking effect would be that you have two white waves separate from each other, and they're competing for attention. So the best thing is to downplay this by covering it with a cloud, putting shadow on it, so this guy over here predominates. I think we're done. Oh, maybe this little thing here. Sometimes when you create the foam, you end up with a tunnel effect. As you can see here, like a line under that. Good suggestion would be just join your foam with the spray of the wave together, and that stops that. You can also see that this is deliberately moving the eye. Here, just one more thing here. We're done. Again, a melodic line here with the rocks. So you can see that all roads lead to Rome. All my crevices and the angles of the rocks are lining up in a direction. I call that rhythm, by the way. And then it brings you back this way so you meet the focal point and shake hands. Okay, so I'm done. That's what I know about painting water in one YouTube presentation in 2 hours. So here's the link. This coming Saturday, registration is now open. Just go to this right here. It's https, oops, I'm missing the 2 dots, artistnetwork.com/paintalong. Let me just put the semicolon there, otherwise some of you might want to copy that and you're going to have a mistake. There, now it's correct. Well, thank you for rejoining me the day after. Sorry for what happened, but I delivered. You got the information, even if it was 24 hours later. And I really hope to see you, especially the new ones, this coming Saturday. As you can see how informative this is, how professional these classes are, and I would like you to see me painting, which is even better than how I talk. You saw some of my painting examples there, so if you feel that my style and my information can improve your artwork, please sign up at the Artist Network for $14.99, and I'll see you on Saturday at 1 o'clock, and you'll get a copy of this PDF on Saturday. All right? So bye-bye for now. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Christine, Jay, and Jude for all the help that you're giving us here answering questions. I appreciate it. I'm sure I'll also see you Saturday, and have a nice rest of the day. Bye, Joanne. Nice seeing you again.